we're going to move on to our next system, and this is our tactile system, our sense of touch. And so in our tactile system, our physical stimuli are going to be mechanical, thermal, and chemical energy that's affecting our skin. So mechanical is sort of a pressure feeling. If you push down on your forearm, that is a mechanical feeling. So you're feeling that pressure. Thermal is when something is warmer or colder than your skin. You can detect that difference in energy. And then chemical energy is going to be maybe you have a new hand cream and you try it out, but it makes your hands tingle. Maybe you're a little bit allergic to it, or maybe it's too harsh and you feel a tingling sensation. That would be chemical energy. And so all of these stimuli, they're going to be physical because they're interacting physically with our skin, and they're going to give us this perception of different kinds of tactile stimulation. So mechanical stuff gives us pressure of touch. Warmth and cold is the thermal stuff. Pain might be chemical. That weird tingling falls under that too. And so our skin has at least 6 different types of sensory receptors that let us pick up on all of these different types of sensations. And this is something that we are very good at. Our tactile localization is very accurate. So across most of our skin, on most of our body, we can figure out where we're feeling something. So if you had a fly on your skin, you could tell very, very quickly where it was so that you could shoo it away. We can localize that sensation. And so all of our different types of nerve cells that are carrying this tactile stimulation information are going to be routed through our spinal cord and into the brainstem along our pathways that we talked about back in the chapter about our nervous system. And so these tactile pathways project through our thalamus into our somatosensory cortex. So they map onto that part of the brain where it showed all the different parts of the body, and each sort of section of the brain was correlated to a different part of our body. So if we had a sensation at the top of our head, it was related to our face or whatever it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. But we knew if one part of that cortex lit up, it was giving us information from a certain part of our body. Confused myself for a second here because these 2 slides are almost identical, and I was supposed to delete one because all this slide adds is this one sentence that says we also have sensory adaptation for our perception of pressure. And you can visualize this pretty easily. So when you get up in the morning, maybe you put on a sweater because it's cold out. And that sweater, when you first put it on, is a little bit constricted. Maybe it feels tight. You feel a little bit of pressure. But as you start your day, maybe by the time you've gone out to brush your teeth even, you almost forget that you're even wearing a sweater. So you've adapted to that sensation. And the same thing happens with your shoes. When you walk around all day, you aren't constantly thinking about your shoes. Unless they're very uncomfortable shoes. But we'll talk about the difference between adaptation and going the other way when we get sensitized, when we get into our chapter on learning. And so we've talked about the tactile side of stuff. We can also get a signal of pain from those same receptors. And being able to perceive pain, as much as it seems bothersome in the moment, it seems really annoying to be able to experience pain, but it is something that evolutionarily helps us survive. It's a warning system that's going to be critical to our survival. If something is causing us pain, we need to learn not to do that anymore. And when we have receptors for pain, they're almost always going to be free nerve endings in the skin. So basically saying instead of our sensory neurons connecting to a specific receptor, like in our sense of taste, where it connects to our taste buds or connecting to the hairs in our membranes for the ears. In this case, pain receptors, the neurons themselves are just going to float beneath the surface of our skin. They are free nerve endings, so they can pick up on any sensation themselves. And when we get these pain signals transmitted to the brain, we actually have two different types of pathways. So they don't just take the pathway that we talked about here, through the thalamus and to the somatosensory cortex from regular touch sensation. They're also going to have a different pathway, a faster pathway that helps us respond to things more quickly. Now, for these fast and slow pathways, we can actually look at them over here. So the fast pathways are these alpha or A delta fibers, the red ones. And the red ones are going a longer distance, but these neurons are specifically myelinated, which, as we talked about in an earlier chapter, means that they're going to have a faster signal. So these A delta fibers get that signal through your thalamus and up to that somatosensory cortex very, very quickly. So that's like when you stub your toe and you have that initial very sharp jolt of pain. That's the A delta fibers getting you that very quick response. These C fibers are actually unmyelinated. So the signal's going to travel more slowly along here, and it's still going to come up into our thalamus and then be distributed throughout the rest of the cortex when it gets there. But this slower feeling is actually going to give us that lasting sensation of pain. So, you know, when you stub your toe and there's that first jolt of pain, and then you actually get upset because you know what's coming, and it's that long, prolonged throbbing feeling. That throbbing that comes after the fact are these C fiber pathways. And so having both of those gives us the initial sort of gut reaction of sharp pain, but it wouldn't do to have that very sharp pain last for a long time, because then we'd be in way too much pain for way too long. So then it sort of deteriorates, and then we can feel the lower levels of throbbing pain from our C fibers. Though wouldn't necessarily want either of these, but they are evolutionarily beneficial. And once this information is in our thalamus, if our brain decides that that feeling of pain is too intense, if it's going to become debilitating, maybe it's going to stop us from functioning. If you think of us living in the wild, if you were attacked by a bear, after the initial pain of being attacked by a bear, there's no real benefit to still feeling the full extent of the pain, especially if you need to be able to fight back and maybe run away. And that's where this descending pathway comes in. Descending green here, neural pathway that can actually help to block some of our incoming pain signals. And we'll talk about that in just a few slides, but this is talking about sort of acting as a gateway to block those upcoming or incoming signals. And so while we're on this talk of perceiving pain, our perception of what we're getting can be influenced by a lot of other factors. So our expectations of pain. If you expect for something to hurt a lot, then maybe you're going to perceive that it hurts a lot. Our individual personality can influence how we experience pain. Maybe you have that one friend who just can't stand any kind of pain. A paper cut is the end of the world for them. It might be a personality thing. It could also be related to mood. So people who are in a lower mood tend to feel pain a lot more acutely. So people who are depressed can feel very strong amounts of pain because of their mental state, which can in turn make their depression worse. So that's a really terrible, vicious cycle that people can end up in. And there's lots and lots of other things. We can break it down into all sorts of different factors, but if we've learned anything about humans and how our brains work, it's that things can get complicated, and our higher mental processes can really influence our perceptions. So things like the placebo effect, which kind of plays on our expectations of something happening, can influence what we think is going to happen. You can tell someone that you're going to give them a needle injection and then just poke their skin, but they're going to react like you stabbed them with a needle because that's what they expected and that's what they assume that they got. There are also cultural differences. In certain cultures, it's frowned upon to show that you're feeling intense pain. And maybe to compensate for that, you're going to act like you don't feel pain at all. And maybe because you're acting that way, you might start to actually not feel pain or feel it much lesser. It can have a actual calculable difference if we compare people from different cultures. And there can be contextual factors, so other stuff going on. Where are you? When is it? What's happening? All of these things can affect how we're feeling pain. And then our last part here is that our intention or our attention and pain perception can interact. So if we're not paying attention to someone, we might not feel the pain. If you've ever been bit by a mosquito and you didn't notice the pain until it starts itching, or maybe if you were paying attention to something, if you watch a mosquito land on your arm and then it bites you, you're going to feel that pain more acutely. It's going to be way worse than if you weren't paying attention at all. And you can again have this back and forth thing where if you're not paying attention, but the pain catches your attention, then the pain might feel worse as you pay more attention to it. So it can be this vicious cycle of paying attention to pain and having it get worse. And then this brings us back to our gait control theory, the idea of blocking pain. And so this theory has the idea that incoming pain sensations are going to pass through a theoretical gait. It's not so much a physical gait as we saw from our diagram. It's more of a section of the spinal cord that can stop those incoming pain sensations from registering. So if we think of how neurons work and how that signal is traveling along neurons up and into the brain, then maybe we prevent those neurons from firing. Maybe we can reduce their membrane potential, make them more negative so they're not going to fire. And that can lessen the sensations of pain. So this gait isn't an anatomical structure. It's not like we physically disconnect our neurons, but it's a pattern of our neural activity. So that descending signal that we saw in green can block those incoming or ascending pain signals. And that's kind of what we think is going on in how we feel pain, but it's not necessarily very well understood. So it seems like some of our endorphins, that descending pathway, and even serotonin can modulate how we're perceiving pain. So they can either lessen the signals that are coming in, or lessen our reaction to those signals, or maybe a little bit of both. But this is a very complex setup again, so we're not 100% sure what's going on. So our next set of systems, we're actually going to look at two together, and these are going to be our body positions. So we have our kinesthetic and vestibular systems, and they're going to give us a sense of where our body is, what's our position, what's our orientation. So for the kinesthetic system, this is specifically monitoring the position of various parts of the body. So this is the idea of where are my arms in relation to me? So if I'm sitting here at my desk, I know that my arms are at my side, sort of towards my mouse, because I need to click to the next slide soon. And even if you are not actively aware of how your body is sitting, your brain is keeping track of where all of your parts are. And most of what we're perceiving to get this sense of kinesthetics is transmitted along the same pathways as our tactile stimulation. So it's going to be using a lot of our tactile information to give us a sense of where our body is. Now, in contrast, our vestibular system is responding to gravity. So this is giving us our sense of orientation, or our location in space. Now, this is the part that I referred to back when we were talking about our sense of hearing, where I mentioned that these semicircular canals would come in handy a little bit later on. So that's where we are. So the inner ear of our auditory system, where those semicircular canals are, is most of our vestibular system. It's helping us figure out, am I upright? Am I laying down? Am I face up or face down? Am I spinning? And so this system helps us stay oriented and balanced in space. So if you've ever had an inner ear infection or known someone with an inner ear infection, it tends to come with vertigo and dizziness and the inability to walk in a straight line. Those people are told not to drive vehicles because their sense of balance and orientation is completely thrown off. And what's usually happening is that these semicircular canals, they're full of fluid that will slosh about in predictable patterns based on how we're moving or how we're oriented. And when we have an ear infection, those can't function normally. If these canals are infected and inflamed, then we might not get any sensation from them at all. So you can't figure out your orientation. And it's really hard to see here, but these tend to be oriented on sort of 3 different axes. So you have one that's sort of up and down, like a vertical axis. You can have some that are horizontal, sort of going a left to right, and then you're usually going to have one that's at like a 45-degree angle to the others. So you're getting multiple dimensions out of these 3 different canals. And so the idea is that if you were feeling fluid sort of at the bottom of this one and throughout all of this one and, just a little bit at the bottom of this one, then you're standing upright. And if the fluid's not moving, you're not moving. But if you do something like sit on a spinning office chair and spin in a circle, then the fluid starts to move or slosh around based on how you're moving. And this is actually why, after you've spun around in a circle and stopped spinning, you'll feel dizzy for a few minutes. And that's because with inertia, with having moved, that fluid is still moving, even though you are now standing still. And so the dizziness comes from your vestibular system telling you that you're moving, but your eyes and your kinesthetic system saying that you are stationary. And when they conflict like that, your brain gets confused and you feel dizzy.